Okay, so this is going to be a tough but really, really vital conversation. We're going to set aside assumptions and just look directly at the data to try and understand the reality of sexual violence. Let's get into it. This quote from psychologist Dr. Marianne Trent really just hits the nail on the head. Sexual violence is this immense, life-altering trauma, but it's one that so often gets hidden away, buried under all this stigma and silence.
So that raises a pretty big question, right? If this is happening in the shadows so much, what story does the data actually tell us about how widespread it really is? Well, that's exactly what we're here to find out.
And the first thing the data shows us is just the scale of it all. Epidemiologists have a word for this: hyperendemic. It basically means a crisis that is constantly and highly present everywhere. The numbers, well, they're staggering.
So let's just dive right into the numbers from the CDC. Here in the United States, 44% of women report experiencing some kind of sexual violence involving physical contact in their lifetime. 44%. That is almost 1 out of every 2 women.
And for men, it's 25%, 1 in 4. And this number is so important because it just completely shatters that damaging and persistent myth that men aren't victims of sexual violence.
And then when you look at transgender individuals, that rate climbs even higher to 47%. The data couldn't be clearer. This isn't a fringe issue. It is a widespread crisis that affects people of every single gender. But, even though this violence touches everyone, the data is pretty clear that the risk is not spread out equally. So let's take a look at the communities that are carrying a much, much heavier burden.
For instance, look at this. Research from the Williams Institute at UCLA shows the rate of violent victimization for transgender people is over 4 times higher than it is for cisgender people. I mean, that disparity is just incredibly stark.
Now, to talk about another community that's heavily impacted, it's really important we respectfully acknowledge the term Two-Spirit. It comes from the Ojibwe language, and it's an umbrella term used by some indigenous North Americans for people who carry both a masculine and a feminine spirit.
And the vulnerability here is just extreme. In one study of Two-Spirit women, a devastating 85% said they had been sexually assaulted in their lifetime. That's a rate 4 times higher than for women in the general population. And the data points to other groups that are disproportionately affected too. People with disabilities face sexual assault at a rate 3.5 times higher. And if we look specifically at the crime of rape, the numbers are just devastating. Over 43% of American Indian and Alaska Native women and 48% of multiracial women have been raped in their lifetime.
Okay, so we've seen the scale of the problem and who is most vulnerable. But this all leads to a huge question. Who's doing this? Who are the perpetrators? And this is where the data smashes one of the biggest myths about rape.
All right, look at this. For women who have survived rape, the attacker is a stranger only about 12% of the time. Think about that. The vast, vast majority are people they know. Over 56% are acquaintances, and almost 40% are intimate partners. And what's really striking is that the pattern is almost identical for male survivors. The perpetrator is a stranger in just under 14% of cases. Again, the huge majority are acquaintances, over 57%, or some other person the victim knows. So here's the bottom line, the one thing you really need to take away from this. That terrifying image we all have of a stranger in a dark alley, it's a statistical anomaly. The reality, for survivors of all genders, is that the person who hurt them is almost always someone they know, and often it's someone they trust. And, understanding that the perpetrator is almost always someone known to the victim, well, that's absolutely key to figuring out the next part of this story, the silence. Why do so few survivors ever officially report what happened? This right here gives you a picture of what researchers call the justice gap. And just using data from the UK as an example, police officially recorded, about 55,000 sexual offenses in a year. But anonymous surveys estimate the real number of adult victims is closer to 500,000. The space between what's reported and what's real it's a chasm. So why? Why is that gap so massive? Well, the reasons are complicated and they are deeply, deeply human. Survivors are afraid of not being believed, or even worse, being laughed at. For men, all these societal myths about what it means to be a man create huge barriers. Sometimes there's no physical evidence, or there's just a profound fear that the justice system itself is going to be traumatizing all over again.
It's a wall of obstacles, personal, societal, and systemic.
Okay, after seeing the data, which is frankly shocking, and understanding the barriers people face, the big question is, what can any of us actually do? So this final part is all about concrete supportive actions.
So if someone trusts you enough to disclose what happened to them, these steps are absolutely critical. And it starts with the most important one there is. Believe them. Period. Try to avoid judgmental comments, control your own feelings, your own anger, so the focus can stay on them. Ask how you can help instead of telling them what they should do. Respect their decisions, whatever they are. And just be a good listener.
And this quote from Little Funder, a Lakota Two-Spirit activist, just drives home why that support is so important. After going through something so devastating, being rejected by your own community, your own friends, your own family, that can be a whole second trauma. Being believed isn't just a nice thing to do, it's essential for healing.
So we're going to leave you with this question. We've seen the data, we have the tools to be better allies. So what's it going to take for us as a society to create a world where a survivor's first brave disclosure is also their last? Because they were heard and believed and supported the very first time.